Hey, I am starting off today. Can you hear that? With the martini. It's Friday where I'm at, and I've finished my client work, which is awesome. And I am free to play with my fiber stuff for the rest of the day. So, I've got this leftover linen. Got a martini. Let me put this away. I'm gonna go and grab a seat here. Rest these old bones. Cheers to you. Okay. Oh, that is good. All right. So, what have we got going on? This is Bodkin's 16-2 linen. I think it's Swedish. And its recommended EPI is 18 to 24 EPI, right? 18 to 24 EPI. Yeah, it takes some tricks to get it onto the rigid Heddle, right? I'm actually going to go ahead and use it at 15 EPI. I've tried it before, and it makes a loose open lace weave. And if you watched last week's episode, we are going to be playing with Huck. So typically when I do a linen project, I prefer to do indirect warp. Indirect warping is using a warping board to pre-measure out your warp, and then you can attach it to your loom, go through your holes and slots, roll it on. And the reason why it tends to work better is because if you know linen is, like they say, there's no stretch to it. It's a really, really firm and very tightly twisted yarn or thread. It's ancient. It's ancient. And what is the thing that trips me out the most about linen is that it is so old and so complicated to make and so hard to work with. And yet it is old. I think possibly older than wool, but I'm not sure. I don't have exact dates in my head, but if you study the history of fibers and being human, linen has been with us for a really long time. So here's how you make linen, right? You gotta grow the flax, right? It's a bast fiber. It lives inside of the flax plant. So you grow the flax, which at least that part's pretty easy. I've grown flax. It's beautiful. It just goes up. I didn't make any linen out of it. I was just curious. And it has these cool little flowers. Beautiful, beautiful. You can just picture whole prairies full of it, right? So you grow the linen. You harvest the linen. You dry the linen. And linen also has a couple different crops too. That's good. So, but you could either grow it for fiber, or you could grow it for the seeds, for the oil, and for the meal. But I think once it gets to the seeding point, it's no longer as good for weaving, I think. I'm not too sure. But so when you buy linen, like most of what you get in the grocery store was made for seeds. So you have to kind of look for the one that's made for fiber, because it grows longer. So you get longer fibers, right? More quality fibers. So anyway, so you grow the fiber, you harvest it, you dry it, and then you ret it, which means you just let it mold, put it in the grass, let it get all gross and slimy, and let it kind of almost ferment, right? Like you're just letting all the stuff rot off so you can finally peel away the bark or the outside of the structure, and then you have the internal fibers. But you're not done yet, right? Then you have to take those and then you gotta break them down. So like you have to remove the outside, you gotta get the inner fibers in the core, and then you gotta beat them until they're soft and they're pliable. Then you gotta brush them until they're straight, and then you get to spin it, and then you get to weave it. So with the linen, you're going to hear a lot of different advice about how rigid Heddles don't have good enough tension, and how difficult it is to weave with, and yada, 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 yada. When I was really interested in linen and was struggling with it, I was trying to research, like, what can I do? And so these are things that I've developed to make it possible for me to work with linen. The good part about it is if you can work with linen, if you can work with yarn and you can work with the linen, like everything's open. The fiber world is your oyster, right? But you can't always take the same kind of warping techniques that you have learned to do, let's say, a scarf, and apply them to linen, because you will cry, because linen just is like, no, 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 we're not going to do that. So linen, because it doesn't stretch at all. It's very, very, very firm. And it's also does this thing too where you could actually crimp it on the sides, like fold it, and it will keep a little like pleat in there. It's just a really unique fiber, and it does like tension, I guess. I don't know. We're not going to worry about tension right now. I think the hardest part about using linen on a original Heddle loom is not that it needs high tension, it's that it needs to be precisely even, meaning it needs to be placed onto your loom with perfect tension all the way through, whether that tension is very tight. Obviously, I think when you start pulling things really tight, the tighter you pull things, the more wonky your tension could be, kind of, because the tightness is kind of taking over for some of the wonkiness. But with a rigid Heddle loom, you can't pull it super tight. You also have this other very important thing that happens when you work with linen. And remember how we talked about how the rigid Heddle loom works, where you have slot threads that stay even, perpendicular. They don't move, right, unless you put a pickup stick in there. And then you have the whole threads that are going up and down and up and down. So in order for things to go up and down, it means that you have an angle going up in there, right? Or an angle going down this way. And once you start to angle in your warp threads, they need to actually be a different length than your slot threads, right? That's a pain in the butt. And that's something that I think, especially when you think about weaving in that way, that's when the counterbalance loom, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense, because you're always moving those threads either up or down. Like they're always going to have to be the same length, because they're always moving the same amount up or the same amount down, so you could get more perfect sheds. With a rigid jack loom, with a jack loom, I'm not sure how that works, because you're always lifting, so they all have to be able to lift and still at the same time. With a rigid Heddle loom, you kind of have to plan it out. You have to think, okay, so if my whole threads need to be a little tiny, just imperceivably bit longer than my slot threads, how can I do that? So think about it, right? One of the things you could do is when you tighten your tension, whoa, this is all crazy. I'm gonna just take this one off. When you tighten your tension, move your Heddle down or up. Either way, but typically I always feel like this happens a lot. People are like, oh, I put my Heddle up and my tension is really great. My shed is beautiful. And I put it down and my shed sucks. Like, I don't know what happened. And that's usually because you tightened everything exactly the same length, right? Your Heddle was in neutral. You tied it all on, so all those threads are the same. And then you move it down and your threads in the slots are a little bit more slack than the threads in your holes. And it's really apparent when you're in the down position. So when I'm working with cotton and linen especially, I always do my final adjustments with my Heddle in the down position. And it helps make it so that way my hole threads are just that tiny little bit longer than my slot threads. And even when I'm neutral, I'll look at it and all of my hole threads will be just a little slack, and they'll actually kind of hang a little tiny bit, and you'll freak out and be like, oh my gosh, my tension's so bad. But no, that's not what's happening. So that is one thing that you could do with linen that will help ensure that you get better tension. Indirect warp, use a warping board that will give you all the ability to have a warp that's all the same length. So you've already taken out one element, and then you put it into your slots and holes and roll on. And when you roll on, it is completely organized when it goes onto your beam, so you're not having cross threads, right, where threads are crossing all over each other, because that creates a tension issue, because threads that cross are also different lengths. And you warp with your Heddle in the down position. helping to kind of balance out that need for the whole threads to be a little bit longer than the slot threads. And by the time you've done those three things, you have basically annihilated a ton of issues you're going to have working with linen. There's still some hacks you might have to do, and there's still some things you might need to kind of play with, which we'll get to that section later, because my warps are never good. If I work with linen, I almost always indirect warp, but I also know that not everybody has the ability to indirect warp. You might not have a warping board, or you might just be doing a really short little sample, and pulling up the warping board and doing all that doesn't really work. And indirect warping does have its advantages, and direct warping, where you're warping from the loom onto a peg, does have some advantages that you don't have with an indirect warp. For me, as a visual person and a visual learner, it's really handy for me to actually see the design I'm making as I'm making it. I have a really hard time if I have to pre-plan all my color sequences and then put them onto the loom. I have a hard time counting them. There's going to be some discrepancies there. So for this particular warp, I'm actually going to show you how to use linen when you direct warp and don't do indirect warp. Yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. And yeah, just give me 1 second though, because I need to weigh. Oh my God. You're gonna see just what a slack, hackish weaver I am here. I'll be right back. I need to weigh this down so it doesn't move anywhere. Okay. So this is my hack. This is an 8-pound. I'll just do this a few times. Woo-hoo. Every time you weave, you gotta exercise. Okay, so this is my little 8-pound hexagonal. See, it's hexagonal, so it has a flat part that stays. I know that I need about a 45-inch warp. Now, if you do indirect warping, you know that because we're going at these angles, that you're not gonna be perfectly the same. So everything about direct warping is a little whack, but that's okay. It's a little wacky. It's all right. I have to measure from that back beam to about 75 inches. And if you have an iPhone, I don't know other kinds of phones, but there's this really awesome measuring app on the phone. So what I will do, 72 inches is about 6 feet, right? Yeah, something like that. So I could actually add, can I add a point here? And I'm gonna let me take this chair. This is how wacky I do this here. Okay, that's 7.1. Yeah, 6 feet. So this is about 72 inches from the edge of this chair all the way over to there. So close enough for me. And yeah, because in a way I feel like whenever I indirect warp, I'm like, if I'm already being really careless, I'm just gonna be super careless. Like, it's fine. It's all gonna be fine. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm gonna do this thing, okay? Blow your mind here. I'm gonna warp on backwards. So right now, in warping off backwards, it doesn't exist. I hope in the next 10 years we could just get rid of the warping off. I hope in the next 10 years we could just get rid of this warping on backwards ridiculousness, because it doesn't actually exist. So right now, if I were to do my direct warp, I would roll back onto my back beam like you usually do, and then you could set up your warps and your holes and slots. You could set up your holes and slots, tie it on, and be ready to weave, but that's not gonna work with linen. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work with linen because you're gonna have some crossing in the back that's gonna continue to follow you for your entire warp, and it's gonna be a pain in the neck. So, let's do it. We are warping backwards. Yeah. Okay, so in the floor loom world, they have warping front to back or warping back to front. They don't say backwards, right? There's a reason why you want to do this. You want to do this because we'll roll onto our front beam. We will And we're going to roll on with perfect tension, by the way. We're not going to just slack it off and just roll. We're actually going to tension it and roll it on like we're doing it for real. And then we're going to do our whole threads like we do. And then tension it, make it all perfect, and then we'll re-roll it onto the back beam. And what that lets us do is correct any tension issues we might have. So it's kind of like, this is rough draft weaving. You're doing your rough draft. You're going to put the final draft onto your back beam. And it works for all kinds of yarns. So if you're having tension problems, I realize it because dyslexia, yay! I always put my warp on whichever side. I mean, I think the first weaving I ever did was backwards. And then I was like, oh wait, my weaving's actually going better. My weaving's actually going better when I do that. So maybe this is a thing I should do. So it is actually now something that is just part of my like repertoire of like how I weave. That said, like if I'm weaving just like a very stretchy merino or something where I know it's really easy to weave, for me at this point, like I flip the loom around and I wrap it onto, I do the simplest kind of warping I can because I already know kind of what I'm doing. God, that sounds egotistical. But you know, I've made like 50 scarves, so I know how to do that. But if I'm working with a really if I'm working with like a really tricky thread, that's what I do. Okay. I had a spill. I'm going to take my handmade dish towel to clean it all up. Oh yeah. Okay. So we turn this around. We're going to be warping onto the front beam. I've got my chair. My chair put out right out there, and I'm going to start warping it up. Oh, wait, where's my other Heddle? Come on, little Heddle. Where are you? And I think I just lost. Oh, no. It's right here. Okay. So I'm going actually through both of these, and that means I also need the Heddle puller thingy. What's that little sleigh hook? The other thing I do is I really don't care if it's centered. I really don't. I don't think it really matters. I mean, you want to get as centered as possible. And I know this is going to be about a 12-inch weave, so I'm kind of visualizing. I'm like, okay, it's going to be like from here to here on my loom. But I don't know. I see people, I don't know. I don't get it. I've totally woven something all the way over on this side. I just moved the loom because I weave with my body, so I just moved the loom over. It's not aesthetically appealing. It doesn't feel good, but it really doesn't, it hasn't affected my weaving all that much. So I'm just gonna give you permission. You don't have to measure out everything, I don't think. I don't know, check with me in 10 years when I'm like, oh, I was so stupid back then. I never measured it out, but I just sort of start around the area. I'm sticking these things in here. And I'm going through both two heddles. And then I'm gonna walk right here. Okay, so I think what I'm gonna do with the edges is I'm gonna do a dark blue selvage. Okay, so I have already rolled back my warp, and now I am slaying my slots and my holes. So this part should probably be pretty familiar. Okay, so the part that I didn't show you is attaching the warp to my front beam. So I already did that part after slaying on my holes. What I'm doing is I'm prepping up the loom so I could roll it all back onto the back beam. Here I'm opening up a shed and I am sliding in a dowel. And then I close the shed, so I'm revealing the opposite shed. And I'm putting in another dowel. So if you've ever used one of those tensioning devices that people sometimes use to roll on your warp, it's kind of the same concept. It's just providing an extra little bit of tension evening. It also helps keep all of my warp threads aligned so they're not crossing. And it just provides a little bit, an extra insurance, I guess, that when I roll back my warp, that those are going to help me so I get the best warp possible. And now's when the magic starts. So I'm moving those sticks back. And once again, underneath very nice, careful tension, I am rolling everything back into my back beam so I could be ready to weave. Okay, so now that I've got that rolled back, I can tell that this weave is going to benefit from just relashing on. I'm going to lose a few inches, but it's going to be just fine. So I lash on with my heddle in the lower position, and I'm trying to kind of get a good open shed there. And then when I close the shed, you'll see here in just a second. Yeah, see how uneven that looks? But that actually is going to look really good when I put it into the down position. See how nice and clean that is? So once I have that done, now I am just doing 3 passes. This is another trick that I love. Doing 3 passes of my header without Sorry, I'm doing 3 passes of my header without beating them. And then I beat them all at once. So I'm kind of working off to the side. It's a little bit hard for me to manage. See, yeah, I'm holding the loom with my hip, so forgive me. It's not usually this wonky. Anyway, I feel like this technique helps even out my warp a lot faster. So once again, you see with the heddles in neutral position, how uneven those warp threads are. But then once I pop the heddles back into the right position, suddenly I get this nice clear shed. So it's the next Friday. Yay, we made it 1 whole week. I did all of my recording over the weekend and a little bit while my kids were at school. So we're going to kind of do this one maybe a little different than we did my last one because I'm still figuring this out. So I think it might work better to do kind of like my advice or lesson or whatever first, and then do kind of the diary aspect later, because you might not be so interested in that, and I don't want to make you sit through me talking just to make you get to something that you do want. So cheers to another Friday. This is kind of recap what has happened over this next week and goal set for the following week to help keep me focused. So I'm really happy to say that I made a bath rug with the corduroy structure, and it is doing great. That's the back. It's a little bit light for a bath mat. That was my husband's complaint, was that it doesn't feel heavy and substantial. It is a little bit on the light side. It's actually almost like cuddly blanket weight, or you could use it for a towel, but the way that it's, all of these things absorb the water, actually takes a while for it to dry. So that's one aspect of it I'm not super in love with, but I think it worked out really, really well, and I'm really happy with it. So I am also working on this project. Show and tell. Here it is. Oops. Not losing all this. So this was my linen project that I used for my linen demonstration. It's doing great. I can't complain. It's an easy weave so far, and the The warp tension it's beautiful. It's working. I'm not having any issues with it. I have a few saggy threads, but it's maybe just one or two. So I'm really happy. But so it's not the fastest weave in the world. It's not the slowest. It's just a weave. Okay, so goal next week, get this thing off this loom. So I have an empty loom, which is exciting. Empty loom time. There's like so much possibility. The loom that I have is actually my loom that has a warping board on the back of it. So I'm gonna be doing some painted warps. So hopefully next week I could show you my painted warps, which will be fun. So this yarn, I'm gonna use it as the backdrop. I wanna see how it performs on the loom. I should probably just do plain weave and really assess it, like wash it and all that, but I'm feeling a little adventurous and I really want to do a monk's milk overshot with this as the backdrop and then this as one overshot color and this is another overshot color. So this is both this yarn that I've dyed. It's a Highland wool. It's really affordable and it's perfect for, it's not something, oh God, it feels like an old fisherman's sweater essentially. So I'm thinking about designing because remember I'm working with that hopscotch threading or whatever. So this was the other structure I wanted to see if it was possible to do. So I did the corduroy is with that threading. This project I'm doing here with the color and weave huck is the same threading. And then this will also be a similar threading too, but using it as overshot. So that's really exciting, right? That's 3, like we talked about last week, that's 3. So once I have that, then I feel like I've really explored this concept of using 2 heddles and alternating the whole threads. And I feel like I have a good set of like examples of what you can do with that. And then I could start to kind of travel down those tree paths a little bit more, maybe get a few more ideas for deflected double weave, really kind of play out this color and weave huck because I see a lot of very cool things you could do with it. There's a pattern by Tom Kinsley that's been going around that I'm gonna look at that draft and see if that draft can't be kind of altered over to the rigid Heddle because I think we would love it. I'm excited to get this off. I'm excited to get this on. I hope I have some really fun stuff to show you next week. And we'll see you later. Bye. Wait. I was ready to clean up and then I forgot. We forgot something. I forgot to tell you what we're gonna do next week. Okay, or what I'm gonna start recording next week. And who knows when it gets published because who knows. So next week, I think we are gonna start looking at weaving drafts because there seems to be a lot of interest in how you take a weaving draft and then how you transfer it to the rigid Heddle. There are some really good resources you might have known from Amy McKnight or downloaded the book from David Xenakis or with the Xenakis technique or any number of people. But I'm gonna go through it just from scratch the way that my brain works with it, because it's the same but different, right? We all have the same but different brains. So that'll be fun. All right, see you next week. Survive, please survive.